A billionaire slams on his brakes because a homeless girl is singing a song only he should know. A billionaire slows at a Seattle street corner, only to hear a homeless girl singing a song he wrote decades ago and never shared with a soul. One note shatters him. One child changes everything. And the truth waiting behind her voice is a secret powerful enough to upend his entire life. A thin drizzle swept across South Seattle, the kind of cold, misty rain that blurred the streetlights into long streaks of gold. The neon sign above the bus stop flickered, as if fighting to stay alive, casting a soft pulse of color over the damp pavement. That was where Aria Coleman stood, barefoot, small and shivering, her toes pressed against the wet concrete as though she'd learned long ago not to flinch at discomfort. Her voice drifted through the chilly evening, a gentle hum at first, then a fragile melody that sounded too old for her 9 years, yet too tender to belong to anyone but a child. Pedestrians hurried past her, heads down, collars turned up, doing what most city folks did when they came across kids like her. Look away and keep walking. But Aria kept singing. She always did. The lullaby was the one thing she had left of her mother, and singing it made the world feel a little less empty. Even on nights when the cold bit through her thin jacket, she held on to the song like a tiny lantern against the dark. A pair of bus headlights sliced through the rain before fading again. Then, suddenly, a sound cut through the quiet, a sharp hiss of brakes. A sleek black Tesla glided to a jarring stop right by the curb. The door stayed closed for several long seconds, the tinted windows revealing nothing. Aria kept her eyes lowered, unsure if she should keep singing or run. Inside the car, Bryce Ellington sat frozen in place. He'd been staring at quarterly projections on his tablet, half listening to the audiobook playing softly through the speakers, when a strain of music outside pierced straight through the noise. It wasn't a random tune, wasn't some popular song or nursery rhyme. It was his. A melody he had written at 17, in a cramped attic bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a second-hand keyboard with 2 broken keys. A melody no one else had ever heard. One he had tucked away with the rest of his past, never shared, never published. Yet here it was, alive in the rain. Bryce felt something tighten in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. He reached for the door handle without thinking, compelled by a force he couldn't name. When he stepped out, the cold air hit him like a slap, but he hardly noticed. His eyes locked onto the girl at the bus stop, small and trembling, her voice threading through the rain like a memory refusing to die. Aria faltered when she saw him, but only for a moment. She steadied herself, drew in a shaky breath, and kept singing, as if the song itself gave her courage. Her voice wavered, but carried a depth that made Bryce's throat tighten. She didn't look at him. She just held her hands together in front of her chest, humming through the final descent of the melody. When the last note faded into the mist, the city sounds returned. The distant rumble of buses, the wet hiss of passing tires, the faint buzz of neon. Bryce stepped closer, unable to stop himself. Where did you learn that song?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aria blinked up at him, unsure whether to answer. She had learned long ago that strangers could be unpredictable. Some kind, some cruel, many impatient. But this man didn't look angry or hurried. He looked shaken, like the song had reached him somewhere deep. She swallowed hard, her voice soft but steady. "My mama taught it to me." Bryce felt the world tilt slightly beneath him. Rain tapped against the metal bus shelter. Aria hugged her thin arms around herself, her hair damp with mist. Bryce took in the sight of her barefoot on the cold pavement, her jacket too small, her cheeks flushed from the wind. He'd seen homelessness in the city countless times, but never had he felt it like this. Never had it come wrapped in a melody only he should have known. He knelt slightly, trying not to startle her. What? What was your mother's name? Arya hesitated, unsure why this mattered to him. She studied his face through the rain, as if searching for something. Then she answered quietly. Naomi. The name hit Bryce like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of memory, half-forgotten nights, late conversations, laughter, music, rose from places he had buried long ago. Naomi. The streetlights flickered again. The rain softened to a whisper. Bryce stared at the little girl in front of him, her voice still echoing in his ears. Something impossible was unfolding on that Seattle sidewalk. Something that made his pulse pound and his thoughts splinter into 1,000 questions. He swallowed hard. Because if Naomi had taught Arya that song, then how had she known it at all? Bryce found himself staring at the little girl, as if the rain had washed away 25 years and left him standing in the middle of a memory he wasn't ready to face. The city hummed behind them, buses groaning up the hill, a siren crying out somewhere in the distance, the constant shuffle of shoes on wet pavement. Yet, in the small circle of light under the bus stop, everything felt unbearably still. Arya shifted her weight from one bare foot to the other. The concrete was cold enough to sting, but she didn't complain. Children who'd spent too long outside learned to quiet their pain. She rubbed her hands together for warmth, glancing at Bryce like she wasn't sure if he was a threat or a promise she didn't dare trust. Before Bryce could gather his thoughts, a woman's voice cut through the rain. Hey, you! Back away from that child! A white woman in a rain poncho hurried toward them, grocery bags swinging at her sides. Her tone wasn't loud, but sharp enough to slice through the fragile moment. She grabbed Arya's arm with a protective fierceness that startled even Arya. Bryce raised his hands instinctively. Ma'am, it's not what you think. Of course it isn't, she snapped. A man in a fancy car pulls over and corners a little girl at a bus stop in the dark. Don't play dumb. She pulled Arya behind her as though Bryce were some lurking danger in the shadows. Arya winced, but didn't resist. She was used to adults taking control of her life with little regard for what she wanted. I wasn't cornering her, Bryce said, hearing frustration creep into his voice. She was singing, and you need to leave, right now. Her glare didn't waver, and Bryce suddenly felt years of public scrutiny settle on his shoulders. He'd been judged before, by investors, by journalists, by people who thought they understood him. But this felt different. This felt like being shoved into a box he didn't belong in. I was just asking her about a song, Bryce said again, softer this time. But the woman had already turned away, gathering her grocery bags and muttering about strange men and kids not being safe anymore. She pushed Arya lightly toward the sidewalk. Honey, go on, don't talk to strangers. Arya hesitated. Just 1 second. One breath. One tiny flicker of her eyes toward Bryce. Conflicted, unsure, but not afraid of him. It was that look that undid him. A look that said she didn't want to go. That something about him felt familiar. That maybe, just maybe, she wanted to stay near the man who recognized her song. The woman tugged at her arm again. Come on, sweetheart. Bryce took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. Arya, are you okay? Did she hurt you? The woman whirled around. Now you're speaking to her by name? Arya opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it quickly. She wasn't practiced in defending herself. Children who spent their lives overlooked often learn to stay silent. Ma'am, Bryce said, steadying his breath. I'm not trying to disturb her or take her anywhere. I swear to you. Sure, she scoffed. That fancy jacket and that car make you think you can do whatever you want. It was such a strange accusation that Bryce almost laughed. But he didn't. The tension in Arya's shoulders kept him rooted in seriousness. He looked down at her bare, reddened feet again and felt something inside him twist. I'm sorry, the woman continued, but her tone made it clear she wasn't. Children like her need protection. They're vulnerable. They need guidance. Someone has to look out for them. Bryce swallowed a surge of anger. She thinks she's helping, he reminded himself, even if she's wrong. It's okay, Arya whispered suddenly, her voice so small he barely heard it. The woman frowned. What did you say? Arya glanced up at her, then at Bryce. Rain trickled from her curls down her cheek. He didn't do anything wrong. The woman stiffened. Sweetheart, you don't know what men like him. Please, Arya said a little louder. He didn't do anything wrong. The woman blinked, confused, as if not used to being contradicted. Arya gently pulled her arm free. She didn't run to Bryce. She didn't move toward him at all. She simply stood on her own, no longer hiding behind anyone, the rain gathering on her lashes. The woman sighed. Fine. It's your choice, but you should be more careful. She walked away, still muttering under her breath, her shopping bags rustling in the wind. The moment she disappeared around the corner, Arya let out a slow breath, as though she'd been holding it the entire time. Bryce took a step closer, not enough to frighten her, but enough that she felt he wasn't giving up on whatever strange connection had appeared between them. You didn't have to defend me, he said gently. Arya looked down, rubbing her arms again. I know. Then why did you? She shrugged, her chin trembling slightly. Because you didn't look like you wanted to hurt me. And she hesitated. You knew the song. Nobody ever knows the song. Rain gathered at the edges of Bryce's collar. The city buzzed around them, but all he could hear was her voice. That melody, he whispered. Where did your mother learn it? Arya took a step backward, shy again. She said someone gave it to her, a long time ago. A chill ran through Bryce deeper than the rain ever could. Someone, not something, not somewhere, someone. The mist grew heavier, and a bus rumbled up the street, its headlights sweeping across them. Arya tucked her hands into the sleeves of her thin jacket and took a small step toward the bus stop. Bryce followed carefully. Are you waiting for someone? She shook her head. Just waiting to see if someone leaves food out. Sometimes they do, sometimes. It hit him harder than he expected. A child alone, depending on scraps left behind. Other people walked by without seeing it, without seeing her. But Bryce couldn't unsee what he had seen. Couldn't unhear that song coming from her small voice. Arya, he began, then stopped. He had no idea what he wanted to say, or what he was supposed to say. She lifted her eyes again, and there it was, the same look from earlier, the one that had pinned him to the sidewalk, the one that said, Don't leave me here without a single spoken word. Bryce swallowed hard. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? Arya didn't answer. The rain kept falling, and the silence stretched out like a road neither of them knew how to walk yet. Bryce stood there, unsure whether to speak again, unsure whether pushing further would frighten the girl. Arya shifted her weight, hugging her elbows to keep warm, her breath rising in faint little clouds as the cold settled deeper into her bones. A bus rumbled past them, spraying mist across the sidewalk, but she didn't flinch. Children who had been through enough learned to hold still through storms. Finally, Arya murmured, It's okay. I don't need anywhere special. She pointed down the hill where a small white steeple peeked above rows of apartment roofs. There's a church. They give dinner sometimes. If we get there before the line closes. Bryce blinked, surprised she was even willing to let him walk beside her. Would you like me to go with you? She didn't answer at first. Her eyes drifted to his shoes, glossy and polished, then back to her bare feet, red from the cold. For a moment, Embarrassment flickered across her face. Quick, instinctive, heartbreaking. Then she nodded once. They started down the sidewalk together, the drizzle softening into a fine mist. Arya kept a cautious distance, her steps light and quick, like a child who had learned to move without taking up space. Bryce slowed his pace to match hers. Cars hissed by on rain-slick streets, headlights carving tunnels of light through the dim evening. When they reached the Rainier Valley Community Church, warm light spilled from the basement windows, accompanied by the muffled hum of conversation. A handwritten sign taped near the stairwell read, "Soup Kitchen Open. All welcome." The smell of bread and chicken broth drifted out into the cold air. Arya hesitated at the top step. "They know me here," she said softly. "They don't mind if I eat slow." Bryce didn't fully understand what that meant until they stepped inside. Rows of folding tables filled the basement, each one occupied by people of all ages. Men with weathered coats, women holding paper cups of tea to warm their hands, teenagers sitting together, laughing too loudly in the way that kids who'd learned toughness often did. Volunteers ladled soup into bowls, steam rising around them in clouds. At the far end stood Ms. Yvonne, a middle-aged black woman with warm eyes and a voice like honey stirred into morning tea. She lit up the moment she saw Arya. "There you are, baby," she said, wiping her hands on her apron before crouching down. "I was hoping you'd make it before we closed the line." She brushed damp curls from Arya's forehead. "You're soaked through. Come sit close to the heater." Arya smiled shyly. This is Bryce." Ms. Yvonne turned her gaze toward him, 1,000 unspoken questions flickering through it. People who worked in places like this learned to read intentions fast. Her expression softened when she didn't see danger in him. "Welcome," she said simply. "Grab yourself a bowl. We don't run out of kindness around here." Bryce followed Arya to the serving line. She accepted a bowl of chicken noodle soup with a murmured, "Thank you," then reached for 2 small rolls. A volunteer tried to hand her more, but she shook her head politely. "They need some for later," she whispered, as if explaining it to herself more than to him. They sat near the back, close to a radiator that clanged every few minutes. Bryce watched Arya tear off tiny pieces of bread and dip them into her soup, eating slowly and carefully, as though each bite had to last. She reminded him of someone gentle, quiet, thoughtful, someone he'd once known. "Your mother taught you that song," Bryce said softly, testing the ground between them. Arya nodded without looking up. "She said it was special." "Did she tell you who wrote it?" She paused, fingers tightening around her spoon. "She said, someone she loved, someone she used to sing with when life was better." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Before Bryce could respond, a man at the next table dropped his fork. Arya immediately leaned over and picked it up for him before he could bend down. "Here you go, mister," she said, with a small smile. The man thanked her quietly. Bryce watched the exchange, struck by the way kindness came naturally to her. No hesitation, no expectation. She offered warmth the way other kids offered toys or jokes. She had so little, yet gave so much. "You do that a lot?" he asked once she settled again. Arya shrugged. "People need help, and Mommy said when you feel small, helping someone else makes you feel bigger on the inside." The sentence hit him with a force that surprised him. "Your mother sounds wise," he murmured. "She was," Arya whispered, her voice drifting like a leaf on water. "Even when she got sick." Bryce looked down at his hands, suddenly unsure how to breathe. Ms. Yvonne passed by, refilling cups of water. She stopped at their table, studying Bryce again, with that watchful kindness of someone who had seen too many hurting souls in her lifetime. "You're new," she said gently. "Arya don't bring strangers here." Not unless they meant something to her. Arya's cheeks flushed pink. He knew the song, Miss Yvonne. Miss Yvonne lifted an eyebrow at Bryce. Oh? That song? Her hesitation wasn't lost on him. You know it too? She shook her head. No. Only that Naomi, Arya's mama, sang it sometimes, said it came from a memory she never quite let go of. The radiator clanged again, loud and sharp. Bryce swallowed the knot forming in his throat. Naomi. The name, spoken by someone else, felt like an echo from a life he had left buried under years of success and silence. Arya finished the last of her soup, wiping the bowl clean with a piece of bread. She looked satisfied, but Bryce could tell she was still hungry. She always would be, he realized. Children without stability learn to tamp down their needs, to shrink them into something survivable. Are you sure you don't want more? He asked. Arya shook her head. Others might need it. Such simple words. Such quiet generosity. It made something inside him ache. Around them, chairs scraped the floor as people began gathering their coats. Volunteers stacked trays. The end-of-day hum settled into the room as the soup kitchen prepared to close. When Arya stood, Bryce instinctively rose with her. Where do you go after this? He asked. She hesitated, glancing at the exit. Different places. Depends on if it's raining. He exhaled slowly, heart tightening. Arya, he said, would you let me help you tonight? Her eyes softened, then grew guarded again. You already helped. You listened. But I want to do more. She looked down at her bare feet, then back up at him, searching for sincerity. The overhead lights flickered slightly, and for a moment it felt like the whole room held its breath. Arya swallowed. Why? Bryce didn't have an answer he fully understood yet. Only a feeling, an old feeling he thought he'd forgotten. One tied to a melody, to Naomi, to a promise he never realized he'd broken. Before he could speak, Miss Yvonne called from across the room. Arya, honey, don't forget your coat. Arya lifted a threadbare jacket from the back of her chair. The sleeves were frayed, and the zipper stuck halfway, but she pulled it on anyway. We should go, she murmured. Bryce followed her toward the steps leading outside, his mind spinning faster than his feet could move. Somewhere between the door and the rain-soaked sidewalk, he realized something had already begun, something he couldn't turn away from. And Arya, small, weary, brave, walked a few steps ahead, as if trusting him just enough to let him stay close. The rain had eased into a fine mist, turning the streetlights into halos of gold. Arya tugged her thin jacket tighter, careful not to slip on the wet pavement. Bryce stayed a respectful distance behind her, though every instinct urged him to walk beside her, shield her from the cold, and ask the 1,000 questions swirling in his head. But he didn't want to scare her, not when she had only just begun to let him into her orbit. They reached a crosswalk where a neon convenience store sign buzzed overhead. Arya stopped, shifting the strap of a small canvas bag she'd picked up from the soup kitchen donation box. She kept one hand tucked inside it, fingers curled around something she held close, something important. Arya, Bryce said gently, are you sure you're okay walking out here alone at night? She nodded, eyes on the crosswalk light. I do it all the time. He winced. That was exactly what scared him. Cars rolled by in streaks of red taillights. A man pushing a shopping cart rattled past, humming to himself. Seattle after dark had an edge to it, sharp, unpredictable, but Arya navigated it with the practiced caution of someone twice her age. Bryce finally stepped beside her. You mentioned your mother taught you the song. Arya's shoulders tightened, but she didn't move away. Yeah, she said softly. She used to hum it when I couldn't sleep. Said it was special. Said Said someone wrote it for her a long time ago. Bryce swallowed. Someone she knew? Arya hesitated a long time before answering. Someone she loved. The walk signal blinked white. She crossed, her footsteps light but steady. Bryce followed, chest tight with memories. Naomi's laughter, her voice singing with him under the rusted attic ceiling, her hand resting gently on his shoulder as he played. A chapter of his life he had closed too quickly, too cleanly, too selfishly. He hurried a little to keep up with Arya. Did she ever say his name? No. Arya hopped over a puddle, landing softly. She didn't like talking about the past. Said the past was like a broken record. Pretty to look at, but you can't play it anymore. The sentence struck him with painful accuracy. Naomi used to talk like that, always turning hurt into poetry, always finding beauty in the cracks. They rounded a corner into a quieter street lined with modest houses and aging apartment buildings. Laundry flapped from a balcony above, catching droplets of rain like tiny mirrors. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and then went quiet. Arya slowed as they approached a closed community center with murals painted across its walls. Bright swirls of blues and oranges, children holding hands, birds in flight. She ran her fingers across the painted feathers, tracing them like familiar paths. This place, Bryce said softly. Do you sleep here sometimes? She shook her head. Just nearby, behind. She pointed to an awning along the side wall, where cardboard had been flattened into makeshift bedding. Only when it's not too cold. A sharp ache hit him. You shouldn't have to live like this, he whispered. Arya didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn locket. The gold plating had faded, the chain knotted in two places, but she handled it as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. My mama gave me this before she stopped, swallowing. She said never to lose it, said it held happy times. The locket's clasp clicked open with a soft snap. Inside, under a plastic film scratched by time, was a tiny photograph. A young woman with warm brown eyes smiled gently at the camera. Next to her sat a boy, no older than 17, holding a guitar, his head thrown back in laughter. Bryce's breath vanished. It was him, his 17-year-old self, careless and hopeful, and unaware of the storms life would bring. The world tilted around him. The sidewalk, the streetlights, the sound of cars, all of it blurred as he stared at the photograph he had forgotten even existed. Arya watched him quietly, her expression unreadable. But her eyes, those wide, searching eyes, studied his reaction carefully, almost fearfully, as if she'd been waiting to show someone this picture for a long time. Finally, she asked the question that had been trembling on her tongue since the moment they met. Do you know him? Bryce tried to speak, but his throat tightened. That picture, where did your mother get it? Arya touched the photo with one gentle finger. She kept it in her wallet for years. Said he was the boy who wrote her favorite song. Said he was the first person who made her feel like she was worth singing for. A cold wind swept through the street, lifting Arya's curls and brushing against Bryce's face like a whisper from the past. He stared at the photo, at Naomi, at his younger self, and felt regret slam into him like a wave. He had walked away from that life, from music, from her. And Naomi. Naomi had kept this photograph long after. Arya's voice broke the silence. Sometimes, I wonder if he ever knew about me. The question nearly brought Bryce to his knees. He crouched down to her level, hands trembling, careful not to reach for her in a way that might startle her. Arya, his voice cracked. Before he could say another word, a distant shout echoed from the end of the block. Hey, you there! A flashlight beam cut across the buildings. A security guard from the community center was making his rounds early, his posture rigid as he spotted them near the building. Arya flinched. Bryce stood quickly. "It's okay." "No," she whispered, backing away a step. "He doesn't like kids hanging around here at night." The guard was already approaching fast. Bryce's mind raced, the photograph burning in his memory. This moment wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but the night wasn't giving them more time. "Arya," he said, voice steady but urgent, "take the locket and put it away. We'll talk somewhere safe, I promise." She clasped the locket shut and hid it in her bag just as the guard reached them. "What's going on?" the man demanded, eyeing Arya first, then Bryce. Arya stiffened, but Bryce stepped forward. "Nothing wrong," he said calmly. "We're just leaving." "Good," the guard muttered. "Kid, you know the rules. Can't stay around here after hours." Arya lowered her head. "Sorry, sir." Bryce glanced at her, small, shivering, clutching the bag with the locket inside, and something inside him made a quiet, unshakable vow. This child, Naomi's child, he wouldn't let her walk through another cold night alone, even if he didn't yet know how to say the truth that was rising inside him like a tatsud, even if he didn't know whether she was ready to hear it. Arya took a shaky breath. Bryce matched her pace, walking beside her this time, the distance between them finally beginning to close. Somewhere deep inside him, a door he'd kept locked for years swung open. And nothing in his ordered, money-built world would ever fit the same way again. Bryce walked beside Arya as they moved down the dim street, each step quiet but heavy with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. He kept glancing at her small form beside him, her thin jacket clinging to her arms, her curls dripping rain onto her shoulders, her bare feet leaving faint prints on the wet pavement. What kind of life must she have lived for all of this to feel normal? They approached the edge of a neighborhood dotted with old apartment buildings, where the glow of streetlights softened into a haze. Arya slowed, her breath visible in the cold air. "I should go now," she whispered. "Go where?" Bryce asked, voice tightening. Arya shrugged one shoulder. "Shelter, maybe, if there's space." She paused. "If not, I'll find a warm place. I know where the vents blow heat." The matter-of-fact tone made Bryce's stomach twist. "No child should have to figure that out," he murmured. Before she could answer, a voice boomed across the street. "Arya Coleman! Hey!" A bulky man in a heavy parka marched toward them. He carried a clipboard under one arm, keys jangling at his belt. His eyes flicked between Bryce and Arya, narrowing with suspicion. The badge clipped to his jacket read, "Calvin Ross, Shelter Supervisor." Arya froze. Calvin planted himself in front of them, breath puffing in short clouds. "You were supposed to check in an hour ago," he barked. "Where have you been? And who's this guy?" Arya's voice shrank. I went to the church." Calvin frowned. "You know the rule. If you're under our care, you stay where we say. You can't just run off with strangers." Bryce took a steadying breath. "I wasn't taking her anywhere. She invited me to the church." "That right?" Calvin sneered. "Or did you just tag along to feel good about yourself?" Arya's shoulders tightened. "He didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Calvin ignored her. He eyed Bryce the way some men look at locked safes they'd like to crack, calculating, territorial. "Look, buddy, we've got enough trouble keeping these kids safe. Last thing we need is rich guys wandering around acting like heroes." Bryce almost flinched at the word rich. It always came with assumptions. "I didn't come here to play hero," Bryce said calmly. "I came because she was alone." Calvin stepped closer. "And what business is that of yours?" Arya instinctively moved between them, tiny but brave. "Please don't." He was kind. He listened when nobody else did. That seemed to irritate Calvin more. He tugged his clipboard out and flipped it open. "Kind, sure. That what he told you?" He snapped the board shut again. Let's go. Curfew's passed. You're coming back with me. Arya looked at Bryce, panic flickering behind her eyes. Bryce felt it like a punch to the chest. I want to make sure she's safe, Bryce said firmly. Nothing more. Calvin scoffed. You think you get a say? She's under county supervision. You're not family. You're not a guardian. You're nobody in this situation. The words landed cold and sharp. Nobody. He should have expected it. Yet hearing it said aloud, standing beside Naomi's daughter, felt like being shoved back into a door he had only just opened. Arya's voice trembled. Can he come with me? Calvin shook his head. No visitors. Not tonight. Not with everything going on. Bryce narrowed his eyes slightly. Everything going on? Calvin abruptly changed tone. Nothing you need to worry about. He grabbed a shelter van key from his belt and gestured for Arya to follow. Arya hesitated again, glancing back at Bryce. Her eyes pleaded for something. Reassurance, maybe safety. Maybe simply not to disappear into the system alone. Bryce knelt slightly, meeting her gaze at eye level. I'll be here, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. She swallowed hard, then nodded and stepped toward Calvin. Calvin opened the van door, muttering, And this is why we don't let them talk to strangers. They get attached. Causes problems. Bryce straightened, jaw clenched. Maybe they get attached because they're looking for someone who cares. For a moment Calvin paused, surprised by the directness. Then he smirked. Well, that ain't your job. Arya climbed into the van, curling her toes against the cold rubber floor. Bryce watched as she pulled her thin jacket tighter, clutching her bag close, her face half lit by the dim dome light inside. Calvin shut the door with a thud. As the van pulled away, Arya pressed her hand to the window. Rain streaked the glass, turning her small silhouette into a blur. Bryce lifted his hand in return, hoping she could see it through the fog and water. The van disappeared around the corner, swallowed by darkness. The street grew quiet again. Just the rain, the distant hum of traffic, and Bryce standing alone under a flickering street lamp, with the echo of a child's song still haunting his mind. He should have walked back to his car. He should have returned to his life of numbers and schedules and carefully managed distance. But instead, he stayed there on the sidewalk, staring at the path Arya had followed. Something wasn't right. Calvin's tone, his grip on Arya's arm, the way she flinched when he called her name. A man learns to trust his instincts after building an empire, and Bryce's instincts were screaming now. There was more going on than a simple shelter curfew, more than he knew, more than Arya could explain. And as the rain began to fall harder, Bryce Ellington made a silent vow. Whatever secrets surrounded that little girl, whatever shadows waited in the system meant to protect her, he would not look away. Not this time. The rain thickened into a steady curtain, tapping against Bryce's coat as he stood alone beneath the street lamp. The city moved around him, cars crawling through puddles, distant sirens echoing off brick walls, but he heard none of it. All he could hear was Arya's voice, trembling in the shelter van's window, the imprint of her hand still burning in his memory. Something wasn't right, and the more he replayed Calvin's behavior, the tighter the unease coiled in his chest. Children didn't shrink like that unless they'd learned to, and men didn't get defensive like Calvin unless they had something to hide. Bryce finally forced himself to step away from the curb and walk toward his car. Water splashed under his shoes. His breath fogged in the cold night as he unlocked the Tesla and slid inside, letting the heater hum to life. He didn't start the engine. Instead, he pulled out his phone. There were very few people he trusted, and even fewer he could call at night without good reason. But Marcus Reed was one of them, a man who understood both the legal system and the children it often failed. Bryce had watched him fight tooth and nail for families who had nothing. Marcus had a way of seeing what others missed, especially when it came to kids like Arya. Bryce dialed. Marcus answered on the second ring. Ellington, you do realize normal people sleep at— I need your help, Bryce interrupted, voice tight. There was a brief silence on the other end. Where are you? Rainier Avenue, Bryce said. The community church's soup kitchen. I met a girl tonight, Marcus, a little one, 9 years old, homeless. And I think— His hand trembled. I think she might be connected to someone I once knew. Marcus exhaled slowly. Start from the beginning. So Bryce told him about the song, about Naomi, about the locket, about Calvin Ross and the van with county tags. He kept his voice steady, but Marcus had known him long enough to hear the cracks beneath it. When Bryce finished, Marcus said, I've handled cases with that shelter before. Oversight there is sloppy. And Ross? I've heard complaints. Bryce gripped the steering wheel. I don't want him anywhere near her. You're not her guardian, Marcus reminded gently. Legally, he can escort her anywhere the county allows. I know, Bryce said, fighting frustration. That's the problem. Marcus's voice softened. Do you want my honest opinion? Yes. This isn't just about helping a child. This is personal. And if you really believe she's connected to Naomi, then you need to be prepared for whatever truth comes next. Bryce closed his eyes. I am. Then listen carefully, Marcus said. Do not approach Ross again tonight. Do not try to contact the shelter directly. Let me look into this first. You said her name is Arya Coleman? Yes. You go home. I'll dig into the records. If Naomi had medical files, or if there were attempts to reach you in the past, the system might have left a trail. Bryce's breath caught. You think there might have been a letter? It's possible, Marcus answered. People fall through the cracks when paperwork does. And if Naomi tried to contact you once— His voice trailed off knowingly. Bryce's stomach knotted. He thanked Marcus and hung up. But even after ending the call, he stayed in the car, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The street around him faded into a blur of movement, headlights smearing into streaks of silver on his windshield. All he could see was Arya's small silhouette inside that van. All he could hear was her voice saying he had listened, and that was enough. It wasn't enough. Not anymore. He started the engine and merged into the street, the city lights reflecting off the wet asphalt like shards of broken glass. When he reached home, his penthouse felt colder than the rain had, too neat, too quiet, too detached from the rawness of the night. He tossed his keys on the marble counter and paced through the living room, unable to sit, unable to slow his racing thoughts. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city shimmering below, but he felt no comfort in its glow. Seattle's skyscrapers, tall, polished, expensive, looked nothing like the world Arya lived in, nothing like the corners she called home. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Found something. Call me. Now. Bryce's heart dropped. He called immediately. Marcus answered with no greeting. Ellington, you're going to want to sit down. I'm fine, Bryce insisted. Suit yourself, Marcus replied. I checked county database archives and there was a letter 9 years ago from a Naomi Coleman, addressed to you at your old office. It was marked undeliverable due to a clerical error. Bryce's pulse hammered. And it never reached me? No. Someone filed it wrong. It was supposed to go into follow-up. Instead, it got sent to storage. Bryce pressed a hand to his forehead. She tried to tell me. Yes, Marcus said. It seems she did. Bryce paced toward the window, chest tightening. The rain outside streaked down the glass, as though the sky itself felt heavier under the truth. "What about Arya?" he asked. "I found her placement file," Marcus replied. "She's been in and out of shelters since Naomi passed. No extended family involved. No clear guardian. Calvin Ross is listed as her point of contact, but that man has had 3 internal complaints filed against him in the last 18 months. Bryce felt his jaw clench. He shouldn't be near her. "And he might not be for long," Marcus said. "I'll file a request to investigate his conduct tomorrow. But Bryce, if your connection to Naomi is what it looks like, then there's something else you need to consider." "What?" "DNA," Marcus said plainly. "We need to confirm it. Not tonight, but soon." Bryce didn't respond at first. His throat was too tight. He thought of Arya's face in the soup kitchen, illuminated by the yellow glow of old ceiling lights. The way she tore her bread into little pieces. The gentle kindness in her eyes. The song, his song, flowing out of her like it had lived inside her all along. "Marcus," he whispered, "you think she could be—" "I think it's possible," Marcus said. "And I think if Naomi tried to reach you, she wanted you to know." Bryce turned toward the window again. Seattle stretched out below him, vast and indifferent, but for the first time he didn't feel at home in it. He felt like a stranger in a world he'd built too far away from where he came from. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I have to see her again." "And you will," Marcus replied. "But you must let me navigate the legal side. For now, rest. Tomorrow will be heavy." Bryce ended the call. He stood there for a long moment, staring out over the glowing city. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered, tired, uncertain, but awakened in a way he hadn't been for years. Finally, he whispered into the silence, as though speaking to someone who still lived between memory and music. "Naomi, what did I miss?" And somewhere in another part of the city, perhaps in a dark shelter room where sleep came hard, a little girl clutched a worn locket under her pillow, without knowing that her world, like Bryce's, was already beginning to shift. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of Seattle morning where the clouds hung low enough to touch the tops of buildings. Bryce stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching cars crawl across the bridge like tiny silver insects. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Arya's small frame pressed against the van window, her hand lifted in quiet desperation. Coffee sat untouched beside him. A man who built empires with spreadsheets and algorithms suddenly found himself unable to process a single number. All he could think about was Naomi's letter that never reached him, the song she kept, the child singing it on a rainy street. A knock at the door broke the silence. Marcus stepped inside without ceremony, shaking raindrops from his coat. His presence filled the room with a grounded calm, the kind Bryce had always relied on when decisions turned personal. "You look terrible," Marcus said. "I feel worse," Bryce admitted. Marcus took a seat on the edge of the leather sofa. "I drafted the petition to review the shelter's conduct, but that's the easy part. The hard part is what comes next." Bryce turned from the window. "Being honest with her." "Being honest with yourself," Marcus corrected gently. "If she is your daughter, everything changes." Bryce didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his coat. "I need to see her." "You can't barge into the shelter," Marcus warned. "There's a process." "I'm not going to the shelter," Bryce said. "I'm going to the church. Ms. Devon might know something the files don't." They drove through damp streets toward Rainier Valley. The church looked smaller today, humbler under the gray sky. Inside, volunteers prepared for the evening meal, the clatter of metal trays echoing in the basement. Miss Yvonne stood near a stack of canned goods, her scarf tied neatly around her neck, When she saw Bryce, her expression softened into something between surprise and concern. "Good morning, Mr. Ellington," she said, hands on her hips. "You look like a man carrying a heavy storm." "I met Arya last night," he began, "and I know," she interrupted gently. "The shelters talk." She came in late, looked shaken. Bryce's jaw tightened. "Do you know how she ended up there?" Ms. Yvonne sighed and gestured for them to sit at a small table. "Naomi brought Arya here when she was still healthy. They'd sit right where you're sitting. Naomi used to help me serve bread. She was quiet. But she had this glow about her. Like music followed her everywhere." She paused, her gaze drifting to a distant memory. "When she got sick, things changed. She tried to keep going, but some battles, well, they take more than a strong spirit." Bryce swallowed hard, the weight of guilt pressing deeper. "When Naomi passed," Ms. Yvonne continued, "Arya stayed with a friend of her mother's for a while. But life is hard for folks without support. Eventually, the county stepped in." "And Calvin Ross?" Bryce asked. "Do you trust him?" A frown creased her forehead. "Some people work in shelters for the right reasons. Some work there because nobody else will hire them. Calvin, he knows how to look busy, but I've seen him lose his temper with the kids. He likes control more than he likes helping." Marcus exchanged a look with Bryce. It confirmed everything they feared. "Do you know if Naomi ever mentioned—" Bryce hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Someone from her past?" Ms. Yvonne studied him for a long moment. "She never said a name, but I saw the way she held that locket, like it carried a whole story she wasn't ready to tell anyone." The locket, the picture, the melody. Before Bryce could ask more, a volunteer approached. "Ms. Yvonne, the delivery truck's here early." "I'll be right there." She squeezed Bryce's hand before standing. "Whatever you're trying to figure out, child, do it gently. Arya's heart has had more cracks than most grown folks." When she walked away, Bryce felt a hollowness settle in his chest. He turned to Marcus. "I'm not waiting anymore. I need to find her." "Legally, we can visit her during scheduled hours," Marcus reminded him, "but she might not stay put long enough." That possibility made Bryce's pulse spike. They headed back to the car and drove toward the foster home listed in the files. It sat near the edge of the neighborhood, an old brick building with faded play murals on the walls. Children's bicycles lay scattered in the yard, wet from rain. Marcus led the way into the office. A woman behind the desk looked up with polite surprise. "Can I help you?" "Good afternoon," Marcus said, flashing his card. "We're here to check on a child placed here last night. Arya Coleman." The woman tapped her keyboard, then frowned. "She's not here." Bryce stepped forward. "What do you mean she's not here? Calvin Ross brought her in last night." The woman shook her head. "She was checked in by the evening supervisor, but shortly after lights out, staff couldn't locate her. We conducted a search of the rooms, the hallway, the yard, nothing." Bryce's breath caught. "She left?" Marcus asked. "She's done it before," the woman said sadly. "Kids who live without stability learn to run before they learn to trust." Bryce clenched his hands. "Where would she go?" "We don't know," she said, "but the police were notified this morning." Bryce took a step back, the room closing in around him. Arya, small, hungry, barefoot Arya, out there alone again. He had known something was wrong. He had felt it in her voice, in the way she lingered near him, as if she wished she could ask for help, but didn't know how. And now she was gone. The woman spoke again, her voice softer. "If it helps, the kids who disappear usually return to the places that feel safest." Bryce thought instantly of two places: the church, the waterfront, the places where music lived. Without another word, he turned and headed for the door. Marcus followed. Bryce, slow down. I can't, Bryce said, voice breaking for the first time in years. She's out there, Marcus, and I won't lose her. Not again. Not before I even get the chance to tell her the truth. The sky outside had darkened again, heavy with the promise of another storm. The wind carried a low hum, almost like a distant note of a familiar song. Bryce listened, and then he ran. Cold air slapped against his face as he sprinted down the foster home steps, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles. The sky had grown darker since morning, clouds curling low over the city like a tightening fist. The wind picked up, tugging at street signs, scattering leaves across the pavement. It was the kind of storm Seattle hadn't seen in weeks, a warning written across the sky. But Bryce didn't slow. He cut through the neighborhood, his breath sharp and uneven, his heart pounding with one thought only: find her. He reached the Tesla, yanked the door open, and started the engine before Marcus even sat down. "Ellington!" Marcus shouted as the car lurched forward. "You're driving like the city owes you answers. Slow down." "I can't," Bryce said, hands shaking on the wheel. "She's out there alone." "And we will find her," Marcus replied, grabbing the dashboard for balance. "But not if you crash into a street pole." Bryce forced himself to ease the accelerator. Barely. The first stop was the church. The parking lot was empty, quiet, the afternoon storm rolling in like a whisper that kept growing. Bryce jumped out before the car had fully stopped and rushed to the basement door. Locked. Lights off. He circled the building, checking under the steps, behind the dumpsters, beside the old storage shed where volunteers kept donations. Nothing. "No sign," Marcus said, scanning the surroundings. Bryce turned slowly in the rain, his eyes sharp with panic. She would have come here. She felt safe here. Miss Yvonne, she always fed her, gave her a place to sit. Arya would have... His voice cracked. Marcus laid a steady hand on his shoulder. "Bryce, think. Where else did she feel safe?" The answer rose instantly. "The waterfront," Bryce whispered. "She said she goes there when she's scared." They bolted back to the car. The storm intensified as they drove, fat raindrops hitting the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. Seattle's waterfront stretched ahead, gray and shimmering under the bruised sky, gulls circling above the waves. As soon as the car slowed, Bryce jumped out and ran toward the boardwalk, scanning every corner, his heart hammered with each step. Wooden planks creaked beneath him as he rushed past benches, leaning railings, old fishermen packing up before the storm. "Arya!" he called into the wind. "Arya, can you hear me?" His voice vanished into the roar of the water. Lightning flickered far out over the sound, illuminating the harbor in a pale flash. Rain pricked at his skin like needles, but he barely felt it. He moved faster, checking under canopies, behind pillars, near the closed concession stands. Nothing. Then, a faint sound drifted through the storm. So soft he thought he imagined it. A humming. A melody. Her melody. His melody. He spun, following the sound along the waterfront, until he reached a narrow overhang where the pier cast a dark shelter from the rain. The humming grew clearer, trembling, fragile. And there she was. Arya sat curled beneath the overhang, knees tucked to her chest, the locket in her hands. Her clothes were damp, her curls stuck to her forehead, and her bare feet were streaked with dirt and rainwater. But she was singing, soft, steady, as if the melody alone kept her from falling apart. When she saw him, she froze. For a moment, neither moved. The storm raged around them, the sky cracking open with distant thunder, but they stood inside a bubble of stillness built entirely of fear and hope. "Arya," Bryce whispered, stepping closer. "You're safe now. I'm here." Her chin trembled. They were going to send me somewhere else, she said softly. They told me I couldn't stay. They told me I had to stop asking about my mom. Bryce's breath caught. You asked about her? Arya nodded, hugging the locket. I heard Mr. Calvin talking. He said I was too nosy. That kids like me cause trouble when we start remembering things. A surge of anger rose through Bryce, cold and clear. He shouldn't have said that to you. You didn't do anything wrong. Arya shook her head. I didn't want them to take me somewhere far. So I ran. I thought, maybe I could find you. Her voice cracked on the last word. Bryce knelt in front of her, rain soaking through his clothes. Arya, he said softly, you did the bravest thing in the world. And I'm proud of you. But you can't run alone. It's not safe. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't know where else to go. You came here, he whispered. To the water. To the song. Arya hesitated. Then she lifted the locket. I kept hearing it in my head. I thought maybe you would hear it too. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, making her flinch. Bryce steadied her shoulder with a gentle hand. Come on, he said. Let's get you somewhere warm. She didn't move. Her small fingers clutched his sleeve. Are they going to take me away again? Bryce felt something inside him break. Not loudly, quietly, the way a heart breaks when it finally realizes what it was missing all along. No, he said. Not if I can help it. Arya blinked at him. Why do you care so much? Bryce's breath caught. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not here in the storm. Not while she was shivering and scared. But the truth pressed against his chest, aching to be spoken. Because your mother mattered to me, he said. More than I ever understood. And because, his voice wavered, because you deserve someone who stays. For a moment, Arya stared at him, her eyes big and dark and full of something fragile, hope, maybe belief. Then she leaned forward, just enough for him to wrap his coat around her small shoulders. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the boardwalk in silver. And in that flash, Bryce saw something he couldn't ignore. A police car turning onto the waterfront road, its headlights sweeping across the rain-soaked pavement. Arya gasped. They're looking for me! Bryce stood quickly, shielding her from view. Marcus appeared behind him, eyes widening. Bryce, we need to handle this the right way. But Bryce didn't step aside. He tightened his coat around Arya, his voice low but certain. Then we'll face them together. For the first time all night, Arya didn't look afraid. She looked found. Bryce felt the shift like a warm pulse through the icy rain. She wasn't clinging in desperation. She was choosing him, trusting him, even if she didn't yet know the whole truth. And that was what made the approaching police headlights feel like a blade sliding between them. Ellington, Marcus murmured, low and urgent. Don't escalate this. We can walk toward them calmly. But Bryce shook his head. Arya's small hand wrapped tighter around his coat. Please don't let them take me, she whispered. The tremor in her voice wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than any shout. Bryce knelt again so she could see his face clearly, even in the dim stormlight. Listen to me, Arya. Whatever happens next, I'm staying right beside you. You're not going through this alone. She blinked against the rain. Promise? He swallowed hard. Promise. The police car rolled to a stop. 2 officers stepped out, one older, one younger, both holding umbrellas against the whipping wind. Their faces were calm, professional, but Bryce saw the recognition in their eyes when they spotted Arya. Mr. Ellington? The older officer asked. We received a missing child alert. We're here for her safety. Arya shrank closer to Bryce. He didn't move. She wasn't running from you, he said, keeping his tone steady. She was running from someone who scared her. Marcus stepped forward with his badge from earlier meetings. Officer Barnes, we've spoken before. Calvin Ross reported Mr. Ellington for alleged interference. That report was false, and we have a developing investigation to prove it. The younger officer glanced at Arya. Sweetheart, are you hurt? No, she said softly. Did this man take you? He asked gently. Arya shook her head. I went to find him. The officers exchanged looks. Rain slapped the pavement, thunder rolling again in the distance. Officer Barnes sighed. Look, we're not here to cause trouble, but protocol requires temporary protection. She'll need to come with us or with the neutral youth shelter until everything is sorted. Arya's breath hitched. Don't leave me. Bryce's chest tightened painfully. He touched her shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. But she didn't want reassurance. She wanted him, now, with her. She grabbed his hand so tightly her knuckles paled. Please, she whispered, not again. Barnes spoke carefully. Sir, you can follow us, but the child must ride with us for now. Marcus leaned in. Bryce, let them do their job. If you resist, you risk everything. Bryce closed his eyes for a single beat. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside him. Every instinct screamed to shield Arya from another frightening car ride with strangers, but every instinct also knew Marcus was right. He opened his eyes and met Arya's gaze. I'll be right behind you, he said. The whole way. I won't disappear. Her grip loosened just enough for him to stand. Barnes approached, offering a gentle hand. Come on, sweetheart. Arya hesitated, then reached for Bryce one last time. He squeezed her hand before she climbed carefully into the back seat of the patrol car. The door closed with a soft click that felt like a verdict. Bryce stood motionless in the storm, rain soaking through his clothes, his heart thudding painfully. He waited until the car pulled away, taillights glowing red through the rain. Only then did Marcus step closer. Now, the lawyer said, pulling a sealed envelope from his waterproof briefcase. We use this. Bryce frowned. What is that? Marcus handed it to him. The DNA test. I got a rush order approved. Everything around them slowed. The wind, the rain, the sound of the police car fading into the storm. Bryce stared at the envelope, his breath fogging the air. The world had already shifted tonight. But this could tear it open completely. His hands shook as he opened the flap. Inside was a crisp document, rain-safe laminated, the text clear even in the dim stormlight. Marcus spoke quietly. You're the father, Bryce. A 99.9% match. Bryce didn't breathe. Couldn't. The lightning overhead illuminated the page for a split second. Then darkness returned, leaving only the words seared into him. Biological parent confirmed. Bryce Ellington. His throat tightened. A warmth, fierce and painful, slammed into him. Not shock, not even guilt, love. A sudden, living thing, heavy and wild. He had a daughter who had stood barefoot in the cold, singing the song he wrote before she was born. A daughter who had run through the city in fear, but also in hope. A daughter whose eyes mirrored a woman he had once loved and lost before he even understood what loss meant. The rain fell harder. Marcus placed a steady hand on his arm. Tomorrow, we take the next steps. Custody hearings, emergency motions, investigations into Calvin Ross. Everything. But tonight, Bryce closed the document carefully, holding it to his chest like something sacred. Tonight, he said, his voice rough, I follow her. He climbed into his car, soaked, trembling, but clearer than he had been in decades. He wasn't rescuing a lost child. He was going after his daughter. Ahead, through the sheets of rain, he could still see the faint red glow of the patrol car turning toward the youth shelter. He pressed the accelerator gently, his headlights cutting through the night. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear of what truth might demand of him, no old ghosts dragging him backward. Only one thought, one promise, one purpose. I'm coming, Arya. I'm here now. I'm staying. And as the storm raged over Seattle, Bryce followed the patrol car through the wet, winding streets, his heart pounding with a truth that would soon change everything. Not just for him, but for the little girl who finally, would not be alone. The morning broke with a pale, tired light, the kind that slips between clouds after a storm, but doesn't quite know if it wants to stay. Bryce sat in the quiet hallway of the King County family court, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles ached. He had paced earlier, then sat, then stood, then paced again until Marcus made him stop. "Sit," the lawyer said. "You're making the security guard nervous." Bryce sat, but his heart didn't. Around him, other families murmured anxiously. Children clinging to stuffed animals, parents whispering careful reassurances they hoped wouldn't become lies. For them, this was just a crowded Tuesday morning in a government building. For Bryce Ellington, it was the fulcrum of his entire life. Arya was somewhere down the hall in a small waiting room with a caseworker. He hadn't been allowed to see her yet. Not until the judge opened the session. Marcus sat beside him, tie perfectly straight, folders precisely stacked. "Remember," he said, "you don't need to win a performance. You just need to tell the truth." Bryce nodded, though truth felt heavier than any boardroom victory he'd ever fought for. A door opened. "Case 47B, Ellington petition for emergency custody review," the clerk called. Bryce stood too quickly, the chair skidding back. Marcus shot him a look. Deep breath. He tried. It barely worked. They stepped into the courtroom, a plain room with wooden benches, bright overhead lights, and the quiet hum of fluorescent fixtures. But it felt like entering a cathedral of judgment. The bailiff announced the judge, a silver-haired woman with a calm posture that suggested she'd seen the worst of human behavior and the best, and was still waiting to learn which one this case would deliver. Bryce's eyes found Arya. She sat near the front beside her caseworker, a simple blue dress neatly pressed, braids falling over her shoulders. When she spotted him, her shoulders eased, not a smile, not yet, but a softening, a small exhale that told Bryce she believed he'd come. She'd been right. He gave a tiny nod. She gave one back. Then the judge began. "We are here to review custody matters concerning minor child Arya Coleman. This includes evaluating immediate guardianship, safety concerns, and allegations of misconduct." Vernon Calvin Ross was seated across the aisle with his attorney. Somehow, he still managed to look smug even though the suit he wore was a size too small. His lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, we have concerns that Mr. Ellington is attempting to leverage wealth and influence to gain access to a vulnerable child he has no established relationship with." Marcus leaned forward, whispering, "He's going for the rich man manipulating the system angle. Predictable." The judge raised a hand. "You'll both have time to speak. Let's begin with factual submissions." Marcus stood with practiced calm. "Your Honor, we submit DNA evidence confirming a 99.9% match. Mr. Ellington is Arya's biological father." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Ross's lawyer stiffened. Ross himself blinked, his confidence flickering. The judge accepted the packet from Marcus, scanning the results silently. "This is compelling." Then she looked up. "Mr. Ellington, please approach." Bryce's legs felt unsteady, but he came to the table. "Mr. Ellington," she said, "before I hear your testimony, Do you have anything to state regarding your relationship with this child? He glanced at Arya, at the fragile hope in her dark eyes, at the small hands folded tightly in her lap. Their entire connection up to this moment had been built from broken pieces, shared songs, and tremors of trust. But it was real. Yes, Bryce said softly. I do. The judge waited. Bryce drew a breath. I didn't know she existed. That's the truth. I didn't know Naomi, the girl's mother, was pregnant when she left. I was young, selfish, so focused on becoming something that I didn't see what I was walking away from. His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. I failed Naomi a long time ago, and I missed every part of Arya's life I should have been present for. He swallowed. But I'm here now, and I'm not here because I'm wealthy or guilty or trying to fix some hole in my legacy. I'm here because when I saw her, really saw her, I recognized the best parts of her mother, her kindness, her strength, her grace. The room remained still. She deserves stability and love, Bryce continued, and if she chooses to let me be part of that, I will spend the rest of my life earning her trust, not demanding it. Arya's thumb brushed the edge of her locket. Her eyes glistened. Ross's lawyer leaped up. Your Honor, we dispute Mr. Ellington's emotional plea. Biology doesn't erase the fact that he is a stranger. Meanwhile, my client is a documented blood relative. Blood relative? Marcus interrupted smoothly. Your Honor, we have financial records indicating Mr. Ross attempted to solicit monies from Mr. Ellington's company shortly before filing for custody. Additionally, there are ongoing investigations into his mismanagement of shelter funding. Ross stiffened. That's irrelevant. It's highly relevant, Marcus said, placing a file on the judge's desk, including statements from shelter staff and residents regarding Mr. Ross's treatment of Arya and other vulnerable children. The judge took her time reviewing the documents. Tension thickened like fog. Then she looked at the caseworker. Ms. Turner, what is your evaluation of the child's welfare? Ms. Turner stood. Your Honor, since entering foster care, Arya has shown signs of anxiety, withdrawal, hypervigilance. But since interacting with Mr. Ellington, she has shown consistent emotional improvement. Increased stability. She expresses a desire for continued contact. The judge nodded slowly, and then, Arya, she said gently, would you like to speak? The little girl stiffened but stood, hands clasped tight. Her voice came softly but clearly. I don't know everything yet. I don't know what being a family means. She looked at Bryce. But when I was scared, he came. Her eyes shimmered. Nobody ever came before. Something broke in the room, some barrier, some doubt. The judge took a measured breath. Thank you, Arya. The courtroom fell silent. Even the humming lights seemed to wait. Finally, this court rules to grant temporary custody of Arya Coleman to Mr. Bryce Ellington, she announced. With continued oversight and transitional support, further evaluation will determine permanent guardianship, but effective immediately, the child may reside under Mr. Ellington's care. Bryce closed his eyes. Arya let out a small, shaky breath of relief. It wasn't final. It wasn't perfect. But it was a beginning. Ross stood abruptly. This is absurd. I'm contesting. The judge interrupted, her voice sharp. Given the evidence submitted, this court also recommends formal investigation into Mr. Ross's financial conduct. You may be seated. Ross sank into his chair, face pale. But Bryce didn't look at him. He only looked at Arya, who now approached slowly, hesitantly, as if afraid the moment might dissolve if she moved too quickly. He knelt again. She reached for him, not his coat, not his sleeve, his hand. Can I go home with you now? She whispered. He squeezed her small fingers gently. Yes, he said. You can. And for the first time, the word felt real. Home. But Bryce didn't take her to the penthouse with glass walls and silent hallways. He didn't take her to the mansion perched above the city with a gate taller than most trees. Those places weren't meant for her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They were monuments to a life he'd built alone, and aloneness had never been what Arya needed. So he drove instead toward a quiet neighborhood near Lake Washington, where he owned a little craftsman house he'd barely used, a place built for peace, not for show. A small porch, a patch of grass, a kitchen that smelled like cedar when warm. As they pulled into the driveway, Arya's forehead pressed lightly against the window. "This is yours?" she whispered. "It's ours," Bryce corrected gently. Then, after a beat, "If you want it to be." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on the soft porch light glowing like a welcome. Inside, the house felt warm and human. Not curated, not staged. Bryce had forgotten it even looked like this. Soft chairs, knitted throws from an old neighbor, warm wood floors that creaked in familiar ways. Arya stepped inside carefully, as though afraid to disturb something precious. She didn't run, didn't explore, didn't touch anything at first. She simply stood in the entryway, soaking it in with wide, quiet eyes. "Do you want to see your room?" Bryce asked. "My room?" He nodded. "If something doesn't feel right, we'll change it. You get to choose." Arya followed him down a short hallway. He opened the door. The room was small but bright. A soft yellow on the walls, a twin bed with a handmade quilt, a small desk by the window where the afternoon sun pooled in a warm square of light. Not extravagant, not overwhelming, just gentle. Arya stepped forward slowly. She ran a hand across the quilt, traced the carved edges of the desk. Her fingers brushed the small keyboard Bryce had set up, almost shyly, as if touching something holy. "It's not fancy," he said, suddenly unsure. "I didn't want to rush you with big things. I thought maybe starting simple might feel safer." Arya didn't speak. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, letting her feet dangle. She pressed her palms to the quilt, like someone testing the temperature of a memory. "It's warm," she said softly. "It feels warm." Relief washed through Bryce, gentle and enormous. Later, he made them grilled cheese sandwiches, simple, golden, crispy on the edges. She watched him the whole time, eyes curious, as though trying to understand what a father looked like doing something so ordinary. They ate at the small kitchen table. Arya took careful, polite bites, wiping her fingers on a napkin. Bryce didn't say much. He didn't want to crowd her, but every now and then she'd glance up to make sure he was still there. After dinner, the sky dimmed to soft blue. Streetlights blinked on outside, glowing through the windows like stars lowered to meet Earth. "Can I play?" Arya asked suddenly, motioning toward the keyboard. "Of course." She sat down and placed her small hands on the keys. She didn't play the lullaby first. Instead, she pressed a few notes together, listening to how they blended. Testing, feeling. When she finally slipped into the familiar melody, it came out softer than ever before, like a secret being offered rather than a memory being clung to. Bryce sat down on the floor beside her, leaning back against the wall. He didn't dare interrupt. He simply listened, letting the sound fill every hollow place inside him. When she reached the final notes, her shoulders relaxed. She turned toward him, tucked her legs underneath herself, and rested her hands in her lap. "Mom always said music makes a place feel like home," she murmured. Bryce swallowed. She was right. Arya hesitated, then whispered, "Can you play with me? The part you hummed at the church." He stood, moved behind her, and sat on the little bench. Their shoulders barely touched, but that one small contact felt like a fragile step across a bridge neither had known how to build. He played quietly, gentle chords, steady, supportive. Arya followed, her melody weaving through his notes like a thin strand of gold. For a moment, they were not billionaire and homeless child, not strangers bound by accident, not two people trying to find the shape of something lost. They were simply them. A father and a daughter learning how to breathe in the same song. Later that night, as Bryce tucked her into bed, careful, slow, asking permission with every small gesture, Arya touched the locket at her throat. "Do you think Mom would like it here?" she asked. Bryce's voice trembled. "I think she'd love it. I think she'd be proud of you. And I think she'd want you to feel safe." Arya nodded, satisfied by the answer. "Good night," she whispered, turning toward the wall. He stepped back, ready to give her quiet. But then she turned again, eyes soft. "Good night, Bryce." And somehow, the sound of his name, spoken gently, willingly, felt like the first brick in a foundation he'd been trying to build his whole life. He turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open, just in case she needed to know he was still there. Down the hallway, he paused, listening. A soft hum drifted from her room, the lullaby again, barely audible, as though she was singing herself to sleep in a place where she finally didn't have to stay awake to stay safe. And for the first time since Naomi, Bryce Ellington let himself hope. Hope, not for redemption, but for family. Winter settled gently over Seattle in the weeks that followed, brushing the rooftops with frost, frosting the breath of early morning joggers, and turning the lakeside air crisp enough to make every sound feel sharper, cleaner. Inside the little craftsman house, life found its rhythm. Arya woke each morning to birds tapping the window. Bryce made oatmeal or scrambled eggs, burned sometimes, but she never complained. After school, they worked on homework at the kitchen table, walked the lake path when weather allowed, and ended most nights sitting beside the keyboard, letting music stitch their days together. And always, when she sang, Bryce heard Naomi, her gentleness, her warmth, her way of softening even the hardest corners of a room. But Arya's voice wasn't a copy of her mother's. It was something new, something rising, something bright. One cold Thursday evening, just as the city hung its holiday lights, Arya looked at Bryce with a seriousness far beyond her 9 years. "Can we go back?" she whispered. "Back where?" he asked. She lifted her chin toward the window, toward the shimmering downtown skyline. "To where you first heard me. I want to sing there again." Bryce felt something shift inside him. Old guilt, old fear, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." "I want people to know," she said softly. "Not about you. About the other kids. The ones still out there." Her voice trembled, but with purpose, not fear. Bryce exhaled. "Then let's do it right." And they did. Over the next week, they planned something small, intimate, honest. A street corner gathering. A winter night concert. Just a girl, her voice, and a message she wasn't old enough to speak in words yet, but could sing in ways grown-ups forgot how to hear. Word traveled faster than either expected. Neighbors asked how to help. Volunteers from the church offered hot cocoa. Musicians reached out. Marcus arranged city permits. Even Ms. Yvonne cried when she heard the plan. "You tell that child," she said, pressing a hand over her heart, "that I'll be right there in the front row." The evening arrived with a thin snowfall drifting like ash from a quiet sky. The same street corner where Bryce's Tesla had once screeched to a stop was now decorated with strings of warm yellow bulbs, casting gentle halos across the wet pavement. Small speakers were set up discreetly, just enough to carry Arya's voice without drowning out the city's own hum. A modest, upright piano stood beside the crosswalk, the kind older than both of them but tuned with care. Bryce sat at it, adjusting the bench, feeling an old familiar tremor in his fingers. He looked out. A crowd had gathered, neighbors, families, church members, curious passers-by, and dozens of people who had read about the event online. Children wrapped in scarves, elderly couples leaning on canes, volunteers handing out blankets. And in the very front, holding a cup of cocoa almost as big as her hands, stood Arya. Her burgundy coat was buttoned to her chin, her golden hair ribbons tied neatly. Her boots, the ones Bryce had bought in such a rush that night, were clean and warm. But what struck him most was her expression. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't small. She was ready. Bryce gave her a small nod. She stepped forward, taking her place by the microphone. "This song," she said softly, voice carrying just enough, "was my mama's favorite. She said it made the world feel less scary." People quieted. Snow fell thicker. Streetlights glowed like watchful stars. Arya glanced back at Bryce. "Daddy?" He paused. Even now, the word cracked something inside him open. "Yes? Play it like you did the night I came home." There was no night he remembered more clearly. He pressed the first key. Gentle. Deep. True. Arya inhaled and began to sing. Her voice rose warm against the cold night, threading through the falling snow like a ribbon of light. It drifted across the street, wrapped around the crowd, softened the edges of the busy world. People who didn't know her story stopped in their tracks. People who did know wiped tears quietly. And Bryce, who once believed music was the one thing he had given up forever, felt each note quietly repair a place in him he didn't realize was still broken. The melody built slowly, the way Naomi had always sung it. But somewhere in the second verse, Arya shifted into her own phrasing, brighter, bolder, full of something hopeful, something living, something hers. Then she sang the final chorus, the one that had once been only Bryce's private confession from his youth. A confession he had feared, fled, forgotten. But Arya gave it back to him in front of the whole city. The last note hung suspended, delicate as the snowflakes falling around them. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. And then, applause swelled, warm and thunderous. Not loud in a way that scared her, loud in a way that lifted her. Arya turned to Bryce. He reached for her hand, not guiding, not leading, simply matching his steps to hers. She looked out again at the crowd, cheeks flushed from the cold and the joy. Bryce stepped to the microphone, breath visible in the air. "Thank you all," he began. "Tonight isn't about me. It's about every child who's ever felt invisible. Every child who's ever had to be braver than their age. Every child who deserves warmth, safety, and a chance." The crowd listened intently. "So," he continued, voice steady, "my daughter and I are starting something, the Arya Foundation, to support homeless children, especially in our underserved communities. Food, music programs, legal guardianship resources, a warm bed, a future." People murmured, nodded, cried. Arya squeezed his hand. "Daddy, can I say something?" He lowered the mic. Arya stepped up. "If you see kids like me, don't walk past us," she said. "We're trying really hard to be brave. Sometimes we just need someone to stop. Just for a minute." Silence settled, deeper than any applause. Then someone whispered, "Amen." Arya stepped back and wrapped her arms around Bryce's waist. He held her close, careful but sure, knowing fully, deep in his chest, that she wasn't hugging him because she was scared. She was hugging him because she belonged. The snow kept falling. People stayed long after the speakers were unplugged. Volunteers set up tables for donations. Children played near the railings. Music lingered in the air like the scent of something sweet. And on that once cold Seattle corner, a place marked by loneliness became a place of hope. Arya leaned into Bryce's side. "Daddy?" she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for stopping that night." He kissed the top of her head. "No," he whispered, voice thick. "Thank you for singing." And in the gentle swirl of winter light, father and daughter stood together, not as two broken stories meeting by accident, but as one whole story finally finding its way home. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you were here with us. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow I'll be right back with another story worth holding on to.